takes them away from working on strategic issues and collaboration. And so we're all invested in automation. We have been for about a decade. And now we have a new tool with generative AI that we think actually will flip the table in our favor. Just to give you a few stats, we've done some early work, and we've been able to free up the time of SOC analysts by 53% using generative AI to do summarization, correlation, drafting reports, et cetera. So you essentially double the size of your SOC if we can get that right, which is very important. Same thing with things like malware analysis. We just released some studies we did on using generative AI to do malware reversing. Stuff that takes one person a week, 2 weeks to pick apart, we can now do in 30 or 40 seconds as a first pass, which is pretty remarkable. And you can imagine all of the talent we have trapped doing these kinds of jobs, and it's such a waste of resources in my view. So I think in industry, we're innovating there and we're going to double down. I think third is the partnership. And it's okay for a Google or an Amazon or a Microsoft to invent all this stuff, but if we're the only ones using it, it's not very helpful. So one of the things we are committed to doing at Google is putting things back in the platform, open sourcing a lot of things, and being transparent about how we are doing things, which will allow other people to adopt methodologies as well as technology. We believe that putting all of this back into platforms will help small to medium-sized businesses, hospitals, schools, et cetera, really level up in the face of such a complex threat landscape that just, to be fair, that they don't have time to reason about, let alone, in so many cases, the expertise to be able to do so. So this is how industry is thinking about this in these three areas. And I think I'm actually quite an optimist that it will help quite a bit.
Fantastic, thank you. What amazing statistics those are from the SOC. I do wonder whether government is really harnessing the power of industry on this. Has anyone got thoughts on how are we doing? What grade would you give us in terms of governments really benefiting from the expertise of industry? Anyone brave enough to give me a grade?
Well, I'll give you a comment.
Okay.
I'll be subjective. And I'm glad Heather mentioned memory safety. We issued a technical report earlier this year on memory-safe programming languages and software metrology. Building blocks is the name of the report. But in that report, it talked about how many vulnerabilities we have because we use, in this broken foundation, non-memory safe programming languages. Many legacy systems are built on non-memory safe programming languages. I found it fascinating. Our team put that report together, and this has been a known vulnerability for years. But for whatever reason, we haven't been able to convince ourselves to transition to memory-safe programming languages at scale. So a significant vulnerability still exists. We need to figure out how to, at scale, do some level of addressing the legacy code that's not memory safe. That's a vulnerability that's there. So I'm glad you mentioned that. That's a challenge area for us. Right now, we don't have a good grade, okay? Well, since you asked, we don't have a passing grade on that vulnerability.
Let me be clear. I don't think anybody quite yet has a passing grade on that one, so you're okay. But I do think, it's on us as industry in partnership with academia and government to start to build those solutions. I think large language models offer a hope, but believe it or not, if you ask the large language model to rewrite some unsafe code into safe code, it's very happy to replicate all the bugs in the new code as well. So we have some fine tuning to do on that. But
thank you. I'm glad I'm pushing you a little bit. This is good. This is good, guys. Matt, we're going to come to you. As Deputy National Security Advisor, you do more than just cyber. You worry about a much broader range of risks. And we can't, as a cyber security community, think about cyber in a vacuum or in isolation. How do you see the interaction between cyber and the other risks in your portfolio?
So you're asking me all the questions which get to project a sense of doom, just threats, risks, problems. Yep. I'll just answer your previous question. So obviously please. The UK encouraged a whole of society approach in our 2021 cyber strategy. There are excellent examples of that collaboration, and the work of the NCSC is facilitating that. However, it isn't kind of routine as it needs to be, and we create walls, I feel, between government, between industry, academia, and beyond, which don't help us counter the threats in exactly the way that we need to, and the more that we can break down some of those barriers, the better. In terms of the broader threat, again, it's hard to see the cyber threat distinct from the physical threat, as distinct from economic coercion. And if you've just been following the press in the UK over the last 7 days, you can see the interlinkages with a cyber attack on the payroll system at MOD. There's been attacks on arson attacks on supplies of satellites to Ukraine, which is going through the court system but has a state link. And just yesterday, there was charges around espionage and transnational repression in the United Kingdom, again linked to a state-based actor. The important thing from a UK perspective, and for all of our like-minded partners, is to make sure that we're seeing the totality of the threat. We're seeing the totality of the vulnerabilities, and we're not just over-focusing on one element, fixing that only to see under the whack-a-mole scenario something else pop up elsewhere. One of the benefits that we have of the NCSC, the National Protective Security Authority, and other agencies providing advice to industry, to private citizens on the steps that they can take to improve resilience, and making sure that we're seeing that connectivity between the physical threats and the cyber threats. Anne mentioned in her opening remarks the work of the Defending Democracy Task Force, and very much getting after those threats as well as the disinformation threats is part of our approach there. Again, on economic security, all of the work that we're doing on outbound investment, looking at foreign direct investment, all of the work that we're doing around securing supply chain vulnerabilities, all of that is to make sure that UK businesses are able to prosper. And then we get to the work on artificial intelligence, where we need to see both the threats and the risks from artificial intelligence, as well as the opportunities, as Heather remarked on before. But we actually have to safeguard artificial intelligence itself, and so it's built in a secure environment. And again, seeing the totality of the threat and making sure that we're taking steps to mitigate those threats is important.
Thank you, Matt. As some colleagues know, I was in a different seat in the NCSC leadership team back in 2016 when we stood up, and a colleague who I won't name somewhere else in the national security system, I remember them saying to me, "But Felicity, cyber is only a vector." And I must admit, my first thought went to that slightly weird orange dress superhero that's called Vector, so it's probably a niche reference for someone that's watched too much Disney or Pixar movies, but it's a weird superhero called Vector. Anyway, so there's no laugh, that's clearly really niche. But my second thought was, that's both true and false at the same time. So cyber is only a vector for bad actors, but it's so much more complicated that you also have to be able to see it in its own lane. And I think our ability to navigate the complexity of that sort of true and false at the same time is so important for our community to be able to do. Has anyone else thoughts on how we do that?
Well,
Thank you,
It's
Harry.
a vector to many avenues. And one of the challenges that we have is that some parts of the public sector and some parts of the private sector view cybersecurity as an inconvenience, as opposed to the imperative that it is. We often get focused on what I'll call our main lines of business. I have to build this widget, or I have to put out this policy, and we think that is what counts. And it may be a measure of effectiveness, but we don't get there unless we have cybersecurity. It's just challenging to appreciate any line of business that does not depend on cybersecurity. Last Monday, we had a convening at the White House on workforce issues, but we had industries from shipping to transportation to education, labor unions, and the common thread across all of them was they needed more cyber professionals because their main line of business was dependent on cybersecurity. And so, and that's something, that's a misnomer that we have to continue to press forward, public and private sector, that cybersecurity is an imperative, not an inconvenience. And of note, when Secretary Blinken did transmit his new international cyber strategy last week, he talked about how cyber has gone from being relevant to being a centrality. And that's a phrase that stuck with me. It's more than relevant. It's central to what we do and how we live.
Yeah. Thank you. So we've talked a lot about partnership, and it's absolutely coming out as a theme across the next couple of days, I think, in many of our panels. Building coalitions that take us to that next gear is so important. And I'm really thrilled that at Cyber UK this year, we have more countries than we think we've ever had before, and we believe there's representatives from 6 continents, which is incredible. And that represents how we can absolutely work more globally. But what are the other coalitions that we need to require ourselves to build? And do we need to push ourselves out of our comfort zone in terms of the conversations we have? Who wants to kick me off? I'm hoping you'll all have an answer on this one.
I can
Claudia,
start.
thank you.
I think getting out of the comfort zone is very, very important. I'm coming from mainland Europe, if you will. So Germany and the rest of Europe is very much still on the regulation path of solving problems, and I think it's an essential part. So I'm not opposed to it, not at all. Even though I'm in the UK, I hope you'll forgive me. I think it is an important part because there's 2 important pieces of regulation which will help us. One of them is really going into making sure that the organizations protect themselves, and they are obliged to do so. And on the other hand, you mentioned the pledge. You mentioned the pledge, right? The pledge that you've signed with CISA. And that's the other part where we basically say the producers of everything software-based basically have to take responsibility for their products throughout the life cycle of the product. And I think those 2 pieces of regulation are very important. And they will help us. But at the end of the day, we will also have to find the right way of building partnerships, and that is something we're not comfortable with, so this is where we get off the couch. We have to build the right partnerships that help us take big steps forward. All those regulations are, piece by piece, by piece by piece, and that's good. We need to do this. No objection from my side. But on the other hand, we're facing essential problems, as you've just said, basically. The internet itself is broken. It's built on foundations which are not fit for purpose right now. So we need to go back really to the origins and correct what has not worked before. And us being policymakers, I mean, I'm working in a public institution. For us, this is something new, working together with industry in order to get these things right. And here we have to step out of our comfort zone, but we need to get those public-private partnerships working, because as public institutions, we will not be able to manage it. We won't manage. So therefore, we need those partnerships in order to get us moving. And this is, at least for mainland Europe, a little bit out of our comfort zone, I have to say.
Thank you, Claudia. Heather.
I think I always like to think back to when we invented automobiles. And if you have ever been to a museum on transportation, there's a great one in London. There were 30 ways to start the car. They didn't have windshields, no seat belts. They were very unsafe. And actually, it took a long time for the automotive industry to converge on a platform such that the car more or less works the same no matter who manufactures it. And the seat belt, which is probably the most obvious safety device and simple in the vehicle, In the US, wasn't regulated until the 70s, I think. I grew up driving around in a car with no seatbelt on, which I can't imagine now. It took all of those years, 70 years, to get industry, government, and the research aligned on the same page. It's absolutely fascinating how quick we've come to the table on AI, for example. And just in a span of, say, 12 to 18 months, everybody's at the table. So for me, it's creating that table, but there's also having enough dialogue and patience to find the seatbelt. I think you have to be a little careful regulating before that, because we will sort of be locked in to not creating the right solution, right? So I think you have to get the solutions right. I like thinking about AI safety, for example, as a framework with specifics to come as we invent it. And the other thing I like to think about is when we harnessed electricity, military planners thought, oh gosh, we're going to create these weapons on the battlefield that zap people. And that's how they would harness electricity, but that actually isn't how it played out. They harnessed electricity to improve supply chains first. We are trying to imagine what we will do with AI, but the reality is the way we use AI, the way our threat actors use AI, is not something we can actually predict, because the technology has not yet been invented. Every week we have a new release, some kind of breakthrough. So I would say we come to the table, we keep the urgency up, but even more important, we keep the constancy of our watchfulness as we see these things develop and come together to kind of put the safety frameworks in. We're a little bit behind on the foundations of the internet, but actually there are a lot of really great solutions. We know things like security keys are good for passwords. We know things like zero trust networks are better kind of network architectures. I think there we can have really deep dialogue, but on AI, constant watchfulness and dialogue is what we need.
I love that patience and dialogue to find the equivalent of the safety belt. That's fantastic. Thank you. Matt, and then Ichikawa-san.
So there's some great car museums in the West Midlands as well, just down the road, actually. I'm very proud. I started my public service career in Coventry, which most people who I work with in Westminster are slightly confused about. But I worked in the Community Safety Partnership in Coventry, where we did a number of things to tackle crime. You mentioned car crime, and one of the big things that shifted the numbers on car crime was actually car manufacturers designing more secure cars. Likewise, campaigns around burglary were reduced by understanding that if you were burgled once, you were more likely to be burgled again. In the UK, there was a great campaign which really brought awareness to the use of seatbelts, the dangers of drink driving, called the Think campaign. And I've been asking my team to scour public policy problem successes. And actually, there isn't one solution. We can talk about regulation, we can talk about tax, we can talk about campaigns, we can talk about incentives. Actually, we need to do it all. And so bringing all of those things to the table, having the right dialogue with the people who will be implementing these solutions, making sure, as Harry says, that this isn't seen as, a cost, the cost of doing cyber, but actually it's core to our business and it's core to our national security and our national prosperity is key. So basically my plea is all ideas welcome, and as we continue to try to keep up with the threat, we're going to have to test and change and adapt, to Heather's point, because the threats aren't going to stay the same.
Thank you, Matt. Ichikawa-san.
Yes. I'm very comfortable with the discussion we have had. We completely agree we need to come out of the comfort zone to face the growing challenges we are facing. As I said, sea change is happening. So in that sense, we need to come up with something out of the box. I completely agree. On the other hand, as a person coming from the Indo-Pacific, well, let me share with you a little bit about what's going on in the Indo-Pacific. There is a quadrilateral, there is one effort which is called quadrilateral framework among Australia, India, Japan, and the United States. It's a strategic partnership, and under the leaders and the foreign ministers framework, there is one working group focusing on cyber. And among us, we have periodical online as well as in-person meeting with regard to the measures on cyberspace. And among four of us, we always discuss how to pressure ourselves, how to pressure our political leaders to come up with innovative measures to compete with the challenges, growing challenges. And then maybe the country like us, like-minded country like us, or the country like the Quad members, are obliged to take the leadership to set the high standard, supported by technologies and the determination of the political leaders and the private companies' leaders. On the other hand, one thing we need to have in mind is that we need to create a community, international community, which is really resilient against a cyber attack. In this context, we need to have in mind the developing countries. In case of Indo-Pacific, there are countries, not only developing countries, and also emerging countries like ASEAN, or more vulnerable countries like Pacific Islands. And as you know, the Indo-Pacific is the region in which the struggling power balance is severely going on. So in that sense, how to help those countries on the ground, in the region, to level up the awareness of the cyber security. So in that sense, in the framework of Quad, we have intensified the discussion about the capacity building, including human resources development on those countries. That's really important. So how to ensure the basic principle like secure by design to be widely shared with those countries. That's really important. And also another aspect we have been discussing is infrastructure, such as undersea cable or a data center. How to make those basic infrastructure really necessary for ensuring the cybersecurity really resilient and safe. That is another area we need to double the effort to tackle this.
That's definitely leaving us on a cliffhanger. We've got through the first hour and a half of Cyber UK. We've just said undersea cables. There are so many people that will be excited to hear your next sentence. But what a fantastic panel. We have covered everything from transport museums through to password security and zero trust, as well as a whistle-stop tour of the realities of the history of the internet and our different government approaches. But what I'm struck by is a real sense of camaraderie and shared problem space, but the need to work together. And so thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I'll ask you in a second to thank my panel, but this is the end of the first session. You get a bit of a break now and have a look at the programs to see where you want to go next. Amazing talks on throughout the day. But please join me in thanking my panel. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much.
There will now be a refreshment and networking break in the exhibition areas, halls 3 and 4. We will see you back here shortly.